Okay, welcome back. It's time that we take what we've learned about MongoDB and about Mongoose, and that we add that into our YelpCamp application so that we can add some data persistence. So the three main steps are installing and configuring Mongoose, and then we have to set up the model, the schema and the model for the campground, and then we need to use the campground model inside of our routes. Before I go any further, I want to point out that I'm using the V2 of YelpCamp, so I made another copy of V1, and I'll be working inside of this for the next few videos. And that's because we're going to start making some bigger changes, some files are going to move around, but I still want you to be able to look at the V1 code. So V2, and I'll be sure to let you know when we start working inside of V3. So let's see what we have for now. Let's run app.js and refresh. Okay, so we have our campground. We can add a new campground, but of course we have the problem where as soon as I restart the server, any new campgrounds that we add are going to disappear. So let's address that. Let's open everything up that we need, which is really just the app.js file for now. And the first thing that we want to do is install Mongoose. So npm install mongoose -- save. And while that's going, we want to make sure we have our process running in the background, mongod. Okay, that's done now, and we could look at the package JSON. Double check that we have Mongoose here. There we go. So now up here, we're going to require Mongoose, save it to a variable called Mongoose. Just like that. And one quick side note, what you will see quite often when we have a lot of require statements up top is something like this, where we can actually get rid of the var declarations and do this. If we have multiple variable declarations in a row, we can separate them by commas. There we go. And this will make a variable named express, another one called app, body parser, and mongoose. It will work just the same, but we don't have to write var over and over. And what you'll also see sometimes is that people will line these up. So it'll look like this. And that's really a matter of personal preference. I'll leave it here for now just so that you see it. But you'll see it both ways. It doesn't impact the way that the code works. It's just a small stylistic change. Okay, so let's save and run node app.js. Make sure we don't get any errors. Great. Now what we want to do is connect Mongoose. So we're going to do mongoose.connect. And we don't have a database yet in our MongoDB for this, so we can just make one dynamically. And we need to connect to mongodb / localhost / and then the name of the database, which doesn't exist yet. So let's just call it YelpCamp, just like that, and save. And this will create the YelpCamp database for us inside of MongoDB. And we can just test that out. If we run the app, great, no problems at all. The next thing we need to do is set up our schema. And I'm going to do that down here. So I'll add a little comment here, schema setup. And this file is going to get a little bit long, and in a future video, we're going to refactor it. So this is not the way that you would do this in a real production app. If you had 10 different models and different schemas, it would get really crazy very fast, especially if you had a lot of routes. So we'll be breaking this into separate files later. But for now, we're just doing one schema. So let's call it var campground schema. And then we'll set that equal to new mongoose.schema with a capital S. And for now, a campground just has a name that's a string and an image that's also a string. And we're just using what we already have here. And we'll save. And then the last thing we need to do is compile that into a model. Var campground equals mongoose.model. And then in here, again, campground in quotes. And then lastly, the schema, which is campground schema. Okay, so what that should do is make us a model now that uses this schema and has a bunch of methods on it, so we can do things like campground.find. And the first thing we want to do is add in a simple campground. So let's just take one of these, and we'll just do a campground.create to start. So that looks like this. And this is just a temporary thing, just to make sure that things work. We're going to delete it as soon as we try it out. So campground.create, and then remember we pass in the object that we want to create. And I'm going to format this a little bit nicer, just like this. So we're creating the object first, and then we have that callback function afterwards. The first thing is the error, and then the second would be the campground. And we'll just do a simple console.log. So if error, console.log error, else, console.log newly created campground, just like that. And then on the next line, we'll do console.log campground. Okay, so yes, it's a lot of code, but what we're doing is creating a campground with this data, and then I've just spaced it out rather than doing it all on one gigantic line. I've spaced it out so we have the callback function that will run once this is done, whether it succeeds or doesn't. We have a callback function, and we're processing the error, or handling it. Barely though, we're just printing out an error. And if there's not an error, then we're going to print out the campground. All right, so what we can do now is test this out just by running node app.js. There we go, newly created campground. So the create worked. There was no error, nothing printed out. So we got this, and it looks like image and name. And also to verify that, we can open the Mongo console, and we can do a show DBs. Here's our new YelpCamp database, and we can do use YelpCamp, just like that. And then what we can do is show collections. And we have campgrounds, which is generated because the name of our model, singular, is campground, and it pluralized it for us. And then what we can do is db.campgrounds, campgrounds.find, and there we go. One campground, it has an ID automatically assigned, name, and image. Awesome. So let's exit out, and let's add in one more campground. I'm going to get rid of this one, and rather than Salmon Creek, we'll do Granite Hill. And I just want us to have some starter data to work with. So name, image, just like that. And then we can run this again. Save. Node app.js. There's our second campground that we created, Granite Hill. And that's enough for now. The next thing we want to do is replace all of this code here. Well, we can get rid of all this code, but we also want to replace all of the code where we're using that campgrounds array. Rather than using a hard-coded array, what we're going to do here, when we're getting all the campgrounds and showing them on a list, this page here, we're going to retrieve all the campgrounds from the database. So we can do that first. I'm going to comment this line out for now. We need to get all campgrounds from DB, and then we want to render that file. And the way that we get all the campgrounds is with campground.find, and we're looking for everything. And then we need our callback function, and it takes the error first, and then our parameter will be called campgrounds. And we'll always check if there was an error, if error. And we'll just do a console.log error for now. We will have better error handling later where we're actually showing a message to a user. For now, we're just printing it out. And then here, what we're going to do is do a res.render like we have here. And we can actually leave it how it is. And the reason for that is that we still want to render the campgrounds file. And in the campgrounds file, we're expecting it to be called campgrounds. The difference is the source of the campgrounds is no longer the array that we had up here. Campgrounds is defined right here. So let's make it a little clearer. I'll call this all campgrounds, like that. And then here I'll change this all campgrounds so that you can see the connection. So we're doing a campground.find, all campgrounds in the collection. When that's done, run this code, the callback. If there's an error, print out the error. Otherwise, take all the campgrounds that just came back and send them through to the campgrounds.ejs file. Now if we save and we restart the server, And I'm going to get rid of this for now. I'll comment it out. Otherwise, we'll end up with another granite hill in our database. So now we'll start the server and refresh the page. We only see 2 campgrounds, which is exactly what we want. These 2 are both in the database, and we're no longer dealing with that campgrounds array that's hard-coded. These will always be in the database until we delete them, but at least if the server restarts or we have any trouble there, they still persist. So now let's focus on getting this to work, so that when a user adds a new campground, it works. And right now we have a small problem. If I just type gibberish in here and hit submit, I get an error. Campground is not defined, and it's telling me that that's on app.js line 54, which is right here, where we're pushing the new campground into campgrounds, but that campgrounds array is undefined because we deleted it. It used to be up here, and we got rid of it. To make this work the way that we want it to, we don't need this line anymore. And instead what we want to do is create a new campground and save to database. So this will remain the same, where we need to grab the name and the image. And this will stay the same as well, where we're making this object. And then what we can do is just save that to the database. And we can either create it with campground.create, and then the first argument there is the new thing we want to create, which we already have conveniently stored in an object called new campground. So we can pass that in. And then we need the callback function, just like that. And remember our 2 arguments, error, and we'll call this newly created, just like that. And we'll do our if there's an error. And if there is an error, if there's a problem with the form data that the user enters in, we would have to think about what we actually want to happen. And eventually what we'll do is send the user back to the form again and show them a message that says something like photo can't be blank, or name can't be blank, or name can't be a number, or whatever it is, but we can show them a message. For now, we're sticking with our tried and true console.log of the error. And then otherwise, if it worked, all that we need to do is go back to campgrounds, just like that. Redirect back to campgrounds. There we go. And then that will run this route again up here, which will find all the campgrounds, including the brand new one that was just added. And then it will show us this template again. So let's test it out. I'm going to restart the server, and I'm also going to grab an image to use, and I'll use this one here, copy that URL, and then I'm going to open up the app here and refresh. Okay, and then we'll try and add a new campground, and this one will be called Clouds Rest. Paste that in, hit submit, and it appears that it worked. We can go back here, we don't get any errors, and if we refresh the page, it still shows up. And if we restart the server, this is the true test, it's still there. Okay, so we've introduced data persistence to our campgrounds. The server can stop, the power can go out, whatever calamity can occur, and our data will still persist. So let me go back to Cloud9, and I'll do a quick summary of what we did. So we added Mongoose in up here. We connected to a YelpCamp database, which didn't exist at the time when we first ran this code, but every subsequent time it was using the initially created YelpCamp database. And then we set up the campground schema that for now has a name and an image, and that's it. But if we want to add more things in, it's very easy and flexible. And then this infamous line where we're compiling the schema into a model, where we're taking this blueprint for what a campground should look like and we're turning it into some code that we can use that has a bunch of methods, including find, which is important. We're using it inside of our /campground as a get, where we're retrieving all of the campgrounds and showing them all. And then also create right here, where we're taking data from the form. And this is a little confusing because there's so many variables. We're grabbing the name and the body from the form. We're making a new object as a separate step. We could have just taken this code and pasted it right here, but I like to make a new variable that just shows what we're doing. So new campground, is an object, name and image coming from the form. Then we create with that, have our callback function that will run once the create is done, whether it succeeds or not, and then we handle the error in here. Right now we have very, very basic error handling, not even really handling, it's just error acknowledging, where we're just printing out the error. And then otherwise, if it does work, we go back to the campgrounds page, which takes us back here. All right, so we now have Mongoose connected. We have our database set up. We're going to keep using this. And soon we're going to see another model and another schema for users when we have user authentication, for comments when we add comments in, and some other fun things.